Welcome back. In this session we're going to see how we can write grammars, actually how we can develop grammars using a graphical editor. So what is the link between a graph and a grammar? Basically we are going to represent a grammar by a graph. So what is a graph? A graph is a set of nodes. We're going to have some special nodes, two special nodes, the initial node and the terminal node. Inside each node we will be able to enter a label, a text, a regular expression. Nodes can be connected or not, and connections are oriented. So in order to see concretely what a graph looks like, so this is a graph. So it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 nodes. This is the initial node. This is the terminal node, and we have connections. There is a connection between the initial node and the node here, between this node and this node here, this node and this node here, this node and this node here, and this node and the terminal node. Notice that they are oriented. Connections are oriented, so there is a connection from A to young, but there is no connection from young to A. Of course, in natural languages, the order of words is important. So what is the connection between this graph and a grammar? Basically, this graph is going to recognize all the sequences that can be spelled by a path that starts at the initial node and can reach the terminal node. So for example, this graph recognizes the sequence a young lady, because I can reach the terminal node. It also recognizes the sequence a lady. Notice that this grammar does not recognize young lady, because when I start at the initial node, if I see in my text young, there is no node that I can reach. You see, I cannot jump. I need to follow connections, so there is no node from the initial node that will recognize the word young. So this grammar recognizes a young lady, a lady, but not young lady. It does not recognize either a young, because if I start here and I recognize a and then young, I'm not finished. You see, I have not reached the terminal node. Therefore, the grammar does not recognize a young. So, in conclusion, this grammar recognizes a young lady and a lady. In order to write this grammar, if you want to draw it on your computer, you click File, in NooJ, File, New Grammar. You click Graphical Editor, and this is a syntactic grammar because it recognizes sequences of words. So you click Syntax. When you have this grammar, when you have entered this grammar, you can save it and then use it in Text Locate to apply it to the text. So how do you use the graph editor? So these are the rules. It's pretty easy. When you click on File, New Grammar, Graphical Editor Syntax, you have an empty grammar that contains only an initial node and a terminal node. So you can control-click in any empty space to create a node. And then you can also control-click in an existing node to start editing its label. When you are finished typing its label, you control-enter, so you press Control and Enter on your keyboard to validate the edition. If you made a mistake, you can control-click in the node to restart, to re-edit its label until you are happy with the result. When the label is correct, in order to validate it, Control-Enter on the keyboard. Warning, do not double-click nodes. Okay, so now how do you connect nodes? Well, you click two nodes to connect them. So since connections are oriented, you have to click the source node first and then the target node after. If you made a mistake and you want to remove the connections, let's say from node A to node B, same thing. you click the A and then you click B in order to disconnect them. If you make any mistake, you can always use undo and redo at will. So as an exercise, for example, I could ask you to enter this grammar, this complicated grammar, which recognizes sequences such as a girl, a lady, a woman, or an interesting lady, or that very charming woman, right? And when you have a grammar such as this one, you can apply it to text. So here, for example, I have the portrait of a lady. I click text locate, and then I apply a grammar, let's say here, this grammar, to the text, and I get the concordance. So with the graphical editor, of course, you can write regular grammars, and basically a regular grammar is a graph which does not contain other graphs. So for example, these graphs are equivalent to regular grammars. This graph also. It's exactly the same as if you would have written a followed by young or epsilon followed by lady. Now with the graph editor you can also write context-free grammars, and I remind you that context-free grammar contains rules that can call other rules. So in the graphical editor, this corresponds to a graph that would contain other graphs. So the main rule usually is named main. Here the main graph will be called main as well. So in order to add a new graph to a grammar, you can click the menu item grammar, new graph, and then you have several graphs that you can add to a grammar. And if you want to delete the current graph, you can delete it with grammar delete graph. Now, if you have many graphs in a grammar, as you can see only one graph at a time, you can display the structure of the grammar with the option, with the menu item grammar show structure. So let's see an example here. This is the equivalent grammar of the Roman numeral context-free grammar that we wrote before. So we have here thousands, and then hundreds, and then tens, and then units. And you notice that these nodes are yellow. They are yellow because they are references to embedded graphs. So as you can see here, this grammar consists of 5 graphs. So this graph, the main graph, plus a graph named thousands, another hundreds, tens, and units. And if you alt-click on this node, you will display the hundreds, the graph corresponding to this node. So you can have as many graphs as you want in a grammar. Here we have 5 graphs. This is a morphological grammar, but of course you can build also syntactic grammars. Another example of a context-free grammar that is represented graphically is here a date. This is a grammar that recognizes dates in English. So this grammar contains 20 graphs, and one of these graphs is here. So this graph, for example, recognizes sequences such as on Monday, June the 22nd, or last Thursday, or Monday the 31st. And this graph here is named Monday, June 5th. This is the name of the graph. And this graph here recognizes, it's still in the same grammar, it's another graph in the same grammar. This graph is named at 7 o'clock, and this graph recognizes sequences such as at approximately 12 o'clock a.m. or at 3 o'clock in the morning, or at around a quarter of 3 in the morning. Now that we have this graph named Monday, June 5th, and this graph named at 7 o'clock, we can combine them in the same grammar, which is date, and in a main graph, and this is the main graph here, that has a reference to the graph Monday, June 5th, which is this one here, and at 7 o'clock, which is this one here. So now you can have a main graph that contains references to embedded graphs, and this gives this graphical editor the power, these graphs, this grammar that consists of 20 graphs, the power of the context-free grammar. If you want to display all the graphs that are in a grammar, you can click Grammar Show Structure, and this is here. So this grammar contains 20 graphs here. NooJ graphical editor contains a few tools to help debugging and testing this grammar. Of course, you can apply the grammar to a text and see the corresponding concordance to see if there are mistakes. You can also debug a grammar. You click Grammar Debug, and then you can type in an expression, for example, at 5 to 10 in the morning, and then NooJ will produce a result, which could be either green, blue, or red. It's green if it's a perfect match. So for example, here, at 5 to 10 in the morning was perfectly recognized by the grammar, so it's green. Another possibility would be blue. It would be blue if it's a partial match. So for example, if I type in at 5 o'clock in Paris, NooJ will recognize at 5 o'clock, but not the whole expression, the whole sequence, at 5 o'clock in Paris. Therefore, it will display the result in blue. And then, if the grammar does not recognize anything in the expression that we typed in, then the result will be a failure and it will be displayed in red. Another important tool that NooJ provides is the contract. You can associate any graphical grammar with a contract that guarantees that you are not going to destroy your grammar inadvertently. So for example here, I have a contract that says I want my grammar to recognize March 23rd on Monday 14th, a long time ago, 2 years ago. So you can type in here in the contract many sequences to make sure that the grammar is recognized. And you can also enter in the contract sequences that you do not want the grammar to recognize, and you prefix them with a star. So here, star Tuesday, February the 30th. This you want this sequence not to be recognized. And when you save your grammar, NooJ will always apply the contract to make sure that everything is okay. Everything is okay if it's green, of course. If NooJ finds out that one of the sequences in the contract is no longer recognized because you made a mistake, maybe you deleted a connection that you should not have, then the corresponding line will be crossed out and displayed in red. And reversely, if the grammar suddenly recognizes a sequence that should not have been recognized, for example, now you made a mistake and now the grammar recognizes Tuesday, February the 30th, then this line will be crossed out and displayed in red. So this guarantees that if you maintain your grammar and you modify it, you will always know if the contract is followed, is checked or not. So you can write any grammar, any regular grammar, context-free grammar, and we will see later context-sensitive and even unrestricted grammars, either as before, as a textual representation with rules such as NP equals det followed by adjective or epsilon, etc., or with a graphical editor. Our experience is that most of the users, most of NooJ users, they prefer to, when they write complicated grammars, to use a graph editor. So we have many graphs that have been developed with NooJ. Some of them recognize named entities for institutions, dates, durations, addresses, professions, organizations in many languages. So for example, this is a grammar that recognizes organizations in Arabic. You see, these are names of organizations, institutions. We have many grammars that are used to disambiguate words. So remember that in the task, when NooJ looks up dictionaries, it will produce many possibilities. Words are basically ambiguous. For example, in Spanish, the word la can be a determiner or a pronoun. So when NooJ looks up the Spanish dictionary, every time it sees the word form la, it will produce the two analyses. But if we apply this grammar here, this grammar tells NooJ that if it finds la followed by a noun, and potentially also an adjective before, it will only keep the annotations that are compatible with this symbol, with the syntactic symbol. So basically, it will remove all the annotations except, and it will only keep the annotations that for the determiner la, or las, or los. But if NooJ finds in a text la followed by a verb, then it will remove all the annotations associated with la and only keep the ones that are associated with pron, which means pronoun. So we have developed dozens of disambiguation grammars for many languages: French, English, Spanish, Italian, etc. Graphical grammars are also used to recognize many structures or many terms. For example, here, this is an application of NooJ in opinion mining, where we have a grammar and a dictionary that contains expressions and adverbs that are judged as positive, such as courageously, prudently, generously. So these, and they are annotated with annotation adv plus p, positive. And we have also a dictionary and a series of grammars to recognize expressions and words that are negative, such as cruelly, imprudently, stupidly. And these are annotated as adverb plus n, as negative. And when we apply this resource to a corpus, here this is the corpus of thousands of little texts extracted from the newspaper Le Monde, 2002. We can build, of course, the concordance, as you can see here, and we can perform some statistical analysis. Another application of graphs, of grammars, is, for example, the spelling correction. So, for example, here, this grammar recognizes spelling mistakes. For example, here, NooJ will recognize a determiner or a number followed by a singular noun followed by one of its adjectives, and if it finds a match, it will produce an error message, which is add dashes. For example, here, if it finds a careless 8-year-old kid, it will produce the message add dashes. You have to add dashes to in this expression. Another graph here, for example, these are mistakes. If you apply this grammar to a text, it will recognize things such as could or should or would followed by a verb in the past participle. But this is a mistake in English. The past participle is incorrect. It should be infinitive. So it will produce the infinitive form of this word. So this is a lexical entry corresponding to the verb, so it's the infinitive. If it finds have followed by a verb which is not in the past participle, it will produce the corresponding past participle form. And as you can see here, for example, when I decided getting, this is a mistake, and NooJ will produce when I decided to get. Could spend, if NooJ find I could spend, it will produce I could spend. And if NooJ recognizes the sequence hadn't decide, if I hadn't decide, this is a mistake, NooJ will correct it and produce a corresponding past participle hadn't decided. And if you combine all these graphs, if you apply them, you could, for example, apply them so that lexical problems are written in red, recognized and written in red with an error message. For example, a lot, heard, or petaling will produce a mistake, the error message, a noun word. Syntactic problems will be colored in green. So, for example, here I decided getting. We apply this grammar, this grammar in green by applying the green button, and then all these mistakes will be colored in green. And then punctuation problems, for example, can be colored in blue with the corresponding error message. For example, here we have to delete a space. There are two spaces. Here we have to add a space between the comma and the word, etc. So you can see that you can develop grammars not only using the text editor, but also the graphical editor. You can construct complex grammars, regular grammars, but also context-free grammars with many embedded rules or many embedded graphs. And usually people prefer to use the graph editor when grammars start to be very complicated. Congratulations, you know now how to develop complex grammars with the graphical editor and develop various natural language processing